Sometimes the most dangerous words are the ones that promise everything will be fine. Sometimes, "It's okay now," isn't comfort. It's goodbye. And sometimes, we don't realize we're hearing a farewell until the silence becomes permanent. There's something haunting about the way we remember last conversations. How certain phrases echo in our minds, taking on meanings we never could have imagined when we first heard them. Today's story is about David, a man whose final words to his daughter weren't "I love you" or "I'm sorry." They were 3 simple words that would become both a blessing and a curse. David Martinez had always been the kind of father who carried the weight of the world on his shoulders, not because he wanted to be a hero, but because he couldn't bear to watch his family struggle. At 42, his weathered hands told the story of 2 decades spent in construction, building other people's dreams while his own seemed to crumble a little more each day. His daughter Emma, now 16, had grown up watching her father fight, battles he never talked about. The late-night phone calls from bill collectors, the way he'd stare at bank statements with that particular kind of silence that fills a room like smoke. The forced smiles when she'd ask for things other kids took for granted. New shoes, class trips, a laptop that didn't freeze every 10 minutes. But David was stubborn in the way that good fathers often are. He refused help from his ex-wife's new family, declined his brother's offers to co-sign loans, and worked overtime shifts until his body screamed for rest. His pride was both his armor and his prison. The trouble had started 6 months earlier, when David's construction company lost its biggest contract. Layoffs came in waves, and David, despite his 15 years of experience, found himself among the casualties. The job market was brutal for men his age, especially those without college degrees. Weeks turned into months, savings dwindled to nothing, and the bills kept coming like an unstoppable tide. Emma watched her father disappear piece by piece. He'd smile when she entered the room, but she could see the exhaustion etched into every line of his face, the way he'd check his phone obsessively, hoping for job callbacks that never came, the way he'd count and recount the few bills left in his wallet, as if the numbers might somehow change. She tried to help in the small ways teenagers can, babysitting neighbors' kids, selling her old clothes online, even offering to get a part-time job. But David wouldn't hear of it. "You focus on school," he'd say, his voice carrying that forced cheerfulness that had become his default setting. "Everything else is my job." What Emma didn't know was that David had started making choices no father should ever have to make. Behind her back, he'd been selling everything of value: his tools, his truck, even his wedding ring from his first marriage. He'd taken out payday loans with interest rates that would have made loan sharks blush. He'd pawned Emma's grandmother's jewelry, promising himself he'd buy it back when things got better. The pressure was crushing him, but David Martinez was determined to keep his daughter's world intact, even if it meant his own was falling apart. He had become a master of deception, painting smiles over despair, hiding financial ruin behind a facade of paternal strength. The morning of October 15th started like any other, except for the envelope David had hidden in his jacket pocket. It had arrived 3 days earlier, a final notice that made his stomach drop to his knees. Eviction, 30 days. After that, they'd be on the street. Emma was getting ready for school, humming some song he didn't recognize while she packed her backpack. She paused at the kitchen doorway, studying his face with that intuitive way children have of sensing when something's wrong. "Dad? You okay? You look tired." David looked up from his coffee, the same cup he'd been staring into for 20 minutes without taking a sip. For just a moment, he considered telling her everything. The eviction notice, the impossible debt, the fact that he'd been lying to her for months about job interviews that didn't exist, and opportunities that had dried up like rain in the desert. The words formed in his throat. "Emma, we need to talk. We're in real trouble." But then he saw something that stopped him cold. Her school portrait from last week was stuck to the refrigerator with a magnet, and in it, she was smiling. Really smiling. Not the careful, worried smile she'd been wearing around him lately, but the genuine, unguarded smile of a 16-year-old girl who still believed her father could fix anything. In that moment, David made a decision that would change everything. "It's okay now," he said instead, his voice steady and sure. "Everything's going to be okay now." Emma's face brightened with relief. "Really? Did you hear back about that job?" "Yeah," David lied, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. "Everything's going to be fine, sweetheart. You don't need to worry about anything anymore." She kissed his cheek and grabbed her backpack, pausing at the door one last time. "I love you, Dad. I love you too, Emma. More than you'll ever know." The door closed behind her with a soft click. David sat in the sudden silence, listening to her footsteps fade down the hallway. He pulled out his phone and typed a long text. Message, one he'd been composing in his mind for weeks. He explained everything, the debts, the lies, the eviction notice. He told her how sorry he was, how proud he was of the young woman she'd become, and how much he loved her. But he didn't send it. Not yet. Instead, David Martinez put on his coat, picked up his keys, and walked out of their apartment for the last time. 1 second after he'd promised his daughter that everything was okay, he disappeared into a morning that would stretch into forever. Emma's math teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, was the one who noticed the police cars first. The school's main office received the call just after lunch, a request to have Emma Martinez report immediately. She walked down that hallway thinking she might be in trouble for something trivial, maybe for the homework she'd forgotten to turn in. She never imagined she was walking toward the moment her childhood would end. The details came in fragments that didn't quite fit together, like pieces from different puzzles. Her father's car found at the edge of Riverside Park. His phone on the passenger seat with that unsent message still in drafts. No note, no explanation, just the echo of his final words. "It's okay now." In the days that followed, Emma would replay that last conversation 1,000 times, searching for clues she'd missed. The way he'd held her gaze a little too long. The slight tremor in his voice when he said everything would be fine. The fact that he'd hugged her goodbye. Something he hadn't done on a school morning in years. She moved in with her aunt across town, leaving behind the apartment that still smelled like her father's coffee and carried the ghost of his promises. The eviction notice was found later, crumpled in his jacket pocket along with the pawn shop receipts and overdue bills that painted a picture of a man drowning in silence. The worst part wasn't the grief. It was the understanding. As Emma learned, the truth about their financial situation, about the months of deception and sacrifice, she began to grasp the terrible weight her father had been carrying alone. She realized that "it's okay now" hadn't been a lie about their circumstances. It had been his way of saying he'd found a solution, even if it wasn't one she could live with. The community rallied around her in ways that would have made David proud and ashamed in equal measure. Neighbors who had struggled themselves took up collections. His old construction crew organized fundraisers. Even his former boss, who'd had to let him go, contributed to Emma's college fund. The help that David had been too proud to accept came flooding in after he was gone, a river of support that arrived exactly when it was too late to save him. Emma finished high school and went to college, something that had seemed impossible during those dark months before her father disappeared. She studied social work, drawn to helping families navigate the kind of crises that had consumed her father. She learned to recognize the signs of someone drowning in silence, the particular way pride can become poison when it keeps people from reaching out. Years later, Emma would understand that her father's last words had been both a truth and a tragedy. In his mind, disappearing was the only way to make everything okay for her, to free her from the burden of his failures, to ensure the insurance money would give her the future he couldn't provide. He'd solved their problems the only way he knew how, but the solution had created a wound that would never fully heal. "It's okay now," became the phrase that haunted and comforted her in equal measure. In her darkest moments, she could still hear his voice saying those words, still feel the certainty and love behind them. But she also learned to hear what he couldn't say, that sometimes asking for help isn't giving up. It's the bravest thing you can do. David Martinez thought he was protecting his daughter by carrying his burdens alone. But some weights are too heavy for one person to bear. His story reminds us that the people we love would rather struggle alongside us than lose us to our silence. If this story moved you, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. And remember, if you're drowning in silence, reaching out isn't weakness. It's the first step toward making things truly okay. Subscribe for more stories that remind us we're not alone, and hit the bell so you never miss a moment that matters.